So I think with that, we're happy to jump in. For those who I haven't met, my name is Julia Coffin, and I'm a senior associate at More in Common US. Today, I'm joined by my colleagues Coco and Emily Gurdon, along with our really wonderful friends at the One America Movement for a presentation and conversation exploring misperceptions of Americans of faith. So More in Common recently published a report titled Promising Revelations, which sheds light on the false assumptions about faith communities in America and explores how these misperceptions fuel polarization and division. So drawing on surveys and interviews we conducted over the last 2 years with more than 6,000 Americans, our study finds significant perception gaps. So this disparity between what Americans imagine people of faith to believe and what they actually believe. Our research specifically complicates the narratives that religious communities are chiefly concerned with politics, that the relevance of religion is fading, that young generations feel distant from their faith, and that religious Americans are mostly intolerant of others. As we'll explore in the presentation that Coco offers later today, these misperceptions have significant and really serious consequences, and also really limit our ability to imagine the critical role that faith communities and leaders can play in healing our divisions moving forward. So we appreciate and have experienced firsthand that this is really difficult work, but we just deeply appreciate your time today and your commitment to overcoming division, whether that's through your role as a faith leader, an academic, a funder, a practitioner, or simply as someone who's concerned about the future of America. Oh, great. And I see that the chat has been enabled. So appreciate everybody dropping in their name and a little bit about themselves, just so we can have a sense of who's in the room. All right, Coco, if you don't mind sharing screen, I can dive into what we have planned for the next 90 minutes. Wonderful. Thanks so much, Coco. We can jump to the next slide on the agenda. So we're going to begin today's call with a series of brief introductions from both More in Common and the One America Movement team to help set the stage and kind of establish the stakes for today's conversation. Then I'm excited to pass it off to my colleague Coco, who's going to take about 25 minutes to present key findings from our recent research, focusing on 3 major misperceptions of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim communities in America, the consequences of those misperceptions, and then some of the shared values and beliefs that can bring us back together. Then we're really excited to welcome Pastor Tom Breeden, Shaykh Ibad Wali, and Rabbi Fred Reeves from the One America Movement team for a panel discussion. These 3 faith leaders, if you haven't met them already, are doing really incredible and inspiring work helping their communities overcome toxic polarization. So drawing both on their deep experience and personal faith, they're going to reflect on some of the findings highlighted in the report and share the role that they think faith communities and leaders can play in helping bring us back together. We are going to take questions throughout the presentation, so appreciate your patience at the beginning, but if anything comes up for you, please feel free to drop them in the chat or the Q&A. We'll be monitoring those throughout, and Coco and Emily will be addressing them either in the chat or we'll be integrating responses as part of the presentations. Our formal presentation today will end at 2 p.m. Eastern, but for those who want to continue the discussion, we're going to move to a Zoom meeting room where the More in Common and One America Movement team will be there until 2:30. Zoom webinars are wonderful, but make it hard to have really thoughtful discussions. So by moving to a Zoom meeting room, we'll all be able to be on camera to unmute ourselves and to kind of continue the discussion. So I would encourage you to join us there if you have time. All right, we can jump to the next slide. Before we dive into the insights, just wanted to share a little bit more about More in Common. So for those who we haven't met, More in Common is a nonpartisan, nonprofit research and civic organization. So at the heart of our mission, we're really trying to better understand the forces that are driving Americans apart, to find common ground, and to help bring people back together to tackle shared challenges. We're perhaps best known for our 2018 study, Hidden Tribes, which introduced the concept of the exhausted majority, which refers to the majority of Americans who feel fed up and exhausted by polarization and division, who hold more flexible and nuanced views, and who genuinely believe that common ground can still be found despite our deepening divides. In all of the research that we do, we really aim to understand the complexities and the nuances of Americans' attitudes and beliefs, and we focus on identifying shared values, inspiring narratives, and pathways that can help us overcome toxic polarization and foster more united, resilient, and inclusive communities. And my favorite part about this work is we don't do it alone. We do it alongside organizations like One America Movement. So feel really grateful to collaborate closely with a wide range of partners in civil society, politics, government, business, faith, education, philanthropy, and media, just to name a few. And jump to the next slide. So over the past couple of years, one of the central themes in our research has really been identifying and challenging what we call perception gaps. So as Americans become more socially, physically, and digitally isolated from people who are different than them, whether it's somebody who holds a different political view, is from a different race or a different religion, these misunderstandings and exaggerated beliefs about others, our outgroup, are becoming more common. So we call this a perception gap, which is the difference between what we imagine others believe and what they actually believe. So perception gaps are problematic because they deepen polarization by really reinforcing negative stereotypes and fueling division, even in cases where there is some strong common ground. Our research has shown that understanding and closing these gaps can really help reduce tensions and kind of catalyze the shared values that help unite us. So lastly, just wanted to share a little bit about why we focused on misperceptions of faith communities in this current moment. So over the past 2 years, the More in Common team has been really fortunate to have a lot of conversations with faith leaders and partners. And in those, we've just heard a lot of kind of frustration, dismay about the public discourse and narratives around what it means to be a person of faith in America today. So as I'm sure you all have seen and experienced as well, media coverage often portrays faith communities either as these highly political spaces that are defined by partisan conflict and extremism, or communities that are shrinking in size and really fading into irrelevance. While these narratives do reflect some undeniable truths that we all have to grapple with and kind of work through, they don't reflect the full picture of what it means to be a person of faith in America today. We wanted to conduct research that really aims to help unravel the interplay and kind of complex relationship between faith and politics, to help uncover the general public's misperceptions of the 3 dominant faith communities in the United States, and to help elevate the voices, experiences, values, and traditions of Christian, Jewish, and Muslim Americans, as well as those with no religious affiliation. I think the second reason we focused on faith, I wanted to underscore, is because there is no single solution to polarization. There's no silver bullet to disrupt the really harmful dynamics of polarization and to bridge the divides we're experiencing in our society today. We genuinely believe that we need to begin in our local communities, in our workplaces, in our schools, in the kind of social clubs we're a part of, but also really in the churches and the synagogues and the mosques where millions of Americans are gathering each week, week after week. And so through correcting these misperceptions of faith communities, we hope that we can begin to reimagine the vibrant role that faith communities can play in helping us navigate division and foster social cohesion. So as we explored these themes of the last 2 years, we were really, really fortunate to work and collaborate with key thought partners. We worked with over 60 organizations, including the One America Movement. Their work supporting faith leaders and communities in overcoming toxic polarization has been instrumental in deepening and shaping our own understanding of the role that religious communities can play, acting as bridges in a divided society. So I've been really grateful for their support throughout the project and to be joined by members of their team today. So with that, really excited to introduce Chanda, the Chief Operating Officer at One America Movement, to share a bit more about their work and the movement of faith leaders they've been working to build.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you for that kind of introduction. It is always such a pleasure to work with More in Common. Thank you to the whole More in Common team for the work that you've been doing on perception gaps over the last few years, whether it is presenting at a One America Summit or interacting with one of our small cohorts of faith leaders in a specific faith tradition. Your partnership with us has just been so rewarding and helpful in helping us and the people that we work with to understand how, in fact, we misunderstand one another and what that means for our society. So thank you for this opportunity and for this amazing research on the religious community in America. So the One America movement hears some of these myths about the religious community day in and day out as we are working with faith leaders and faith communities across the country. These myths such as that our faith is driven by politics, or that faith is irrelevant, or that people of faith are inherently intolerant. And these myths can cause us to push the religious community to the side, especially as we're working to engage on strengthening our democracy. People might think that the best thing for people of faith to do is to just kind of sit this one out. Don't cause any trouble around here as we're trying to strengthen the democracy here in the United States. But at the One America movement, we know that is just not true. In fact, we believe that toxic polarization is, in fact, a spiritual crisis. It's not just a question of what kind of democracy we're going to have or what kind of society we're going to live in, but what kind of people are we going to be as individuals? Are we going to hate our neighbor, or are we going to love our neighbor? Are we going to reject the stranger, or are we going to welcome the stranger? And that's why we're building a network of people of faith who speak and act against toxic polarization in accordance with their own faith tradition. But this is really, really hard to do when there are so many misperceptions about people of faith in our country. So you'll hear a little bit about these three big myths. And I wanted to frame that with a little bit of experience from One America and how we see these myths showing up in our work. So the first myth is that the faith community is irrelevant in the United States. And actually, I was in Grand Rapids earlier this week, and after an event, someone came up to me and they said, "Well, why are you working with faith communities? That's so 20 years ago." She said, "You should be out in the streets having these conversations." And I thought, yes, we do. We do need to be out in the streets having these conversations as people of faith, bringing our faith out into the streets, because we know that 106 million Americans attend religious services regularly, and that is not a population that we can discount. But it wasn't too surprising to me that this person also shared this piece of her own wisdom with a little bit of almost derision in her voice, almost contempt for the faith community. And I think that might be driven by the second myth, which is that our politics drive our faith and not the other way around. But there is a hallmark of toxic polarization, which is this idea of a singular, rigid identity. So in our healthy society, we can have many different identities. I can be a mom, I can be a Christian, I can be a Cub Scout den leader, I can be a leader at a nonprofit. And depending on the situation I'm in, right, different identities kind of bubble to the surface, and I can engage with people in many different ways. But in a toxically polarized society, our identities get wrapped into what's called a singular, rigid identity. Whether I'm a good Christian or a good mother or a good Cub Scout den leader becomes perceived through the lens of our politics. So it isn't that people of faith are having politics drive their engagement with their faith community. It's that people are viewing us through the lens of politics. But we support faith leaders and faith communities to put their identity as a person of faith above that political identity, to get out of that singular, rigid identity mindset. The final myth that we'll talk about today is that people of faith are intolerant. And that's simply a myth that is actually in opposition to the faith traditions represented on our panel here today. In each of our scriptures and sacred texts, we can read how we should live in community, how we should be engaging with people who are different than us, who believe different things than we believe. So our faith traditions already give us the tools that we need to address toxic polarization and how to live in a healthy society. We're taught to love our neighbor and to welcome the stranger. And our faith traditions can give us that identity that transcends politics. If we can't break down these myths, then we can never use what we are given through our faith traditions to better our society. So this research is incredibly important for us. It confirms some of what we already knew, which is that while people of faith in this country are very misunderstood, we also have a valuable role to play in addressing toxic polarization. So thank you again to More in Common. Thank you specifically to you, Julia, to all of our panelists here today, and for everyone who has joined in this conversation. I can't wait to hear your questions later.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I feel like I always leave any conversation with your team feeling just very inspired and excited to continue to unpack some of those kind of unique assets and gifts the faith community has to offer to help us navigate this current moment through conversation with your colleagues in the panel presentation after we share some insights. So with that, very excited to pass it off to Coco, who's going to share some kind of top line insights from our most recent research.
Thank you, Julia, and thank you, Chanda, for that fantastic introduction. Let me quickly share screen. And hello, everyone. So great to be here. I saw some familiar names and new friends in the chat. Welcome. I'm Coco Shu. I'm a researcher at More in Common and one of the lead authors of the Promising Revelations report. Really excited to share with you some of our top-line findings, but quickly a word on methodology. Our report is based on mixed methods research study. We conducted our first nationally representative survey in September last year with 4,200 American adults and additional oversamples from Jewish, Muslim, and Latter-day Saint communities. We then conducted our second nationally representative survey earlier this year with 2,000 American adults recontacted from the first survey. We also conducted 18 focus groups to get at the personal stories and voices of Americans of faith across different traditions and around the country. If you have any questions, please feel free to share in the chat and in the Q&A function. My colleague Emily will try to address as many as she can, but we have a more extensive Q&A at the top of the hour at 2 p.m. Eastern. So as Chandra summarized earlier, our research found that there are three big myths about faith in America. The first one is the idea that faith is driven by politics. And this tendency and trend to view faith communities primarily through a political or partisan lens is particularly visible on social media. So here we analyze the words most commonly paired with evangelical Christians, American Jews, American Muslims across different social media platforms in the past 2 years. And as you can see in these word clouds, the words most associated with these communities are actually quite political. For example, if we look at the left-hand side here, online conversations about evangelical Christians often have to do with political figures like Trump or using words like Republican, conservative, etc. Far fewer posts and discussions actually reference the daily lives of Americans of faith or matters of theology or religious observation, or even mention major holidays across different faith traditions. And the tendency to over-politicize faith communities, or at least view faith communities through a political lens, is also seen in what we call perception gap. As a reminder, perception gap is the difference between what we think one group believes in versus what they actually believe in. Our research found that many Americans have huge perception gaps and overestimate the importance of political identity and party affiliation to faith communities around the country, but especially to evangelicals. What we can see in this chart is the light purple dots here represent what evangelical Christians actually believe in. And the darker purple dots represent what non-evangelicals think evangelicals believe in. And what we can see here is only 4% of evangelical Christians say being a member of their political party, being a Democrat or a Republican, is their most important identity. But non-evangelicals estimate that over 40% of evangelicals would agree with that statement. This gives us a whopping 37% of perception gap. Similarly, we found that 20% of evangelical Christians agree that being a good Christian means supporting the Republican Party, which is in the minority. But non-evangelicals estimate that over half, so the majority of evangelicals would agree with this statement. We find similar perception gaps when it comes to political identity and party affiliation around Catholic communities as well. In reality, our research found that few Americans say political identity is their most important identity. In contrast, most Americans actually say their faith identity or their family role, such as being a parent, a sibling, an uncle, is most important to who they are. Only or less than 1 in 10 Americans actually say being a Democrat or a Republican is their most important identity. Moreover, political causes are actually not the main motivations for why people turn to their faith. So here we ask Americans, why do you turn to your faith or faith communities? We found that most actually chose to deepen their relationship with God, to find comfort during difficult times, and to look for guidance on important questions in life. And if you can look at the bottom part of this chart, we see that fewer than 1 in 10 Americans say they turn to their faith to advance social or political causes or to express their political views. Moreover, few Americans view partisan affiliation as key to religious devotion. What we see here is the majority of Americans across different faith traditions, most don't agree that being a good Christian or being a good Jew or being a good Muslim means supporting either of the political parties. Most people do not consider voting habits or party affiliation to be a litmus test for what makes a good follower or a devout believer. In reality, most people actually still emphasize that moral values rather than political party affiliation define what it means to be a good member of their faith. Here we can actually hear from the research participants that we spoke to and how they answered this question. Do you think being a Democrat or a Republican is important to being Christian? First, we can hear from Douglas, who's an evangelical Christian and very conservative Republican from Georgia.
God's welcoming of all different, people of all political beliefs. And he's not just, doesn't just love Republicans or doesn't just love Democrats or any other political party. So.
And on the right-hand side, we can hear from Leroy, a non-evangelical Protestant and a moderate Democrat from Georgia.
I think a good Christian is much more complicated than just being liberal or conservative, Republican or Democrat. Good Christians are concerned with the well-being of all people, regardless of sexual orientation, racism, abortion support.
We don't have time to play the entire clip, but I would highly encourage you all to check out our website to listen in on what Americans of Faith have to say on these topics. And taking all these points into account, the misperceptions that we have about political identity of different Americans of faith really show us that in our polarized age, we too often allow politics to shape the way we look at each other. But in reality, most of us actually don't see our political identity as the most important part of who we are. The second misperception we found is that faith is becoming irrelevant. A common perception of religious communities that we often see on the news or in public conversations is that faith is on the decline. This emphasis on the dechurching phenomena is justified by statistics that we're seeing. For example, we know that the religious nuns or people without religious affiliation is on the rise. Church attendance has been in decline. But as Chandra mentioned earlier, this narrative of emptying pews is not the full story. In conversations with many Americans across the country, we found that places of worship still matter. For example, here we hear from Danielle, a Catholic and a conservative Republican from Pennsylvania, and Hasina, a Muslim and a moderate independent from New Jersey, both coming from very different religious backgrounds, different political ideology, but both share that their places of worship offer a sense of community and connections. And in conversations with religious minorities, as well as racial or ethnic minorities across different faith traditions, we heard that places of worship also provide communal spaces where people feel accepted and not marginalized. And beyond places of worship, we found that faith remains personally important to most Americans, whether they show up at a place of worship or not. So here we see that over 7 in 10 Americans say that their faith identity is important to who they are. And if we look at the data broken down by generation, we actually see that the majority across different faith traditions say being Christian, Jewish, Muslim is important to them, including 2/3 of Gen Z, which is actually not far behind other generations. And speaking of Gen Z, we found that young Americans are actually more likely than average to turn to faith for belonging and community. So here, if we look at the same question that we showed earlier, why do you turn to your faith or faith communities? We see that Gen Z are slightly less likely than average to say they turn to their faith to deepen relationship with God, to find comfort during difficult times, but more likely to say they turn to their faith to feel a sense of belonging and to be part of a community. I think what these data point to is that even as places of worship grapple with declining service attendance, they can offer young people not only spiritual connection and guidance, but also opportunities to experience belonging in community. This is particularly important as we think about the epidemic of loneliness and what is the role and future of faith when it comes to the younger generations and what they need in our society. The third misperception we found is that religious people are intolerant. In public discourse about religion and public life, we often hear that faith is associated with fundamentalism and intolerance. One example is that when we asked a panel of over 100 Americans, what comes to mind when you see the term evangelical Christians? Many of them use phrases like Christian nationalist or a narrow-minded point of view. But the reality is quite different from this misperception. We found that most Americans actually do support religious pluralism. In fact, 8 in 10 Americans, including a majority across different faith traditions, agree that the US should be a place where individuals of all religious beliefs and no religious beliefs feel that they belong. And we can see that the percentage who disagree with this statement is actually lower than 5% across groups. However, Americans really underestimate the support for religious pluralism, especially among evangelicals, Muslims, Catholics, and religious nuns. What this chart tells us is that if we look at the colorful dots here, we see that the majority of evangelicals, Muslims, Catholics, and religious nuns agree and support religious pluralism. But people who are outside of these communities estimate that only around half of evangelicals and Muslims would agree or support religious pluralism. And these misperceptions that religious communities are intolerant are very important to address and correct, because entrenched assumptions that the other side is intolerant and not supportive of my own existence makes it much harder to build trust and connection, and much harder to inspire interfaith engagement. Moreover, misperceptions don't exist in a vacuum, and there are consequences in real life. One consequence is what we call collateral contempt. So going back to the first misperception about faith is driven by politics, one prominent example of the politicization of religious communities is this perceived alignment between evangelical Christians and the Republican Party. And this misperception actually has significant consequences. Our research found that the more Democrats and independents overestimate the percentage of evangelicals who are Republican, the more negatively they feel towards all evangelicals. We call this phenomena collateral contempt, which is the tendency for animosity towards political opponents to sort of spill over to religious groups that are perceived to be aligned with one political team. And essentially what is happening is that animosity from Democrats and independents towards Republicans, which is a partisan animosity, is also misdirected towards all who identify as evangelical because of this perceived association with the Republican Party. Collateral contempt really overlooks the ideological diversity within evangelical communities in America and exacerbates and exports polarization onto an entire faith community. Another consequence of misperception is they contribute to an environment where faith communities feel that who they are have become targets for attacks and ridicule. We found that many Americans across different faith groups feel under attack, judged, and misrepresented. For example, around 2/3 of evangelicals and American Jews feel that their religion is under attack, and around 2/3 of Jewish and Muslim Americans and over 7 in 10 evangelicals feel that they are judged more than others. And a similar level across different faith communities feel that they are misrepresented by political and media elites. At the same time, we see that liberal and conservative Christians feel judged for different reasons. For example, on the left-hand side, we see Leroy, a moderate Democrat, and a non-evangelical Protestant saying that the media very seldom talk to any Black evangelicals. So in a lot of conversations, we heard similar points to this. We heard that some liberal and evangelical and non-white evangelicals feel that the media and public discourse often equate evangelicals with white conservative evangelicals, overlooking the beliefs of other groups and other evangelicals across the country. But on the right-hand side, we see that some conservative Christians feel that they're always judged and depicted by the media or the general public as bigots or extremists. For example, Susan, an evangelical Christian from Indiana, said, "It feels like it's religious freedom for everyone but us. When we try to stand behind our beliefs, we're haters and not loving." So even behind the data we showed earlier that many groups feel under attack, the reasons for feeling under attack and the perception of threats often are different. Lastly, while most faith groups feel under attack and judged by others, Jewish and Muslim Americans have a very distinct experience of threats to safety in their daily lives. Here we see that over 4 in 10 Muslim and Jewish Americans say that they have felt unsafe because of being Muslim and Jewish. And over 4 in 10 Muslim Americans say they have felt hesitant to share their religious identity, followed by 3 in 10 Jewish Americans. And we don't see that across any other groups. And the experiences with actual threats to safety in daily lives is particularly a standout experience among religious minorities. And what these points, data points really reflect on and is that in the context of heightened partisan animosity, efforts to reduce these misperceptions take on greater importance. In order for individuals to participate in interfaith engagement, they need to feel respected and valued and understood. And one way of challenging misperceptions is to underscore the common ground that we share across lines of differences. For example, we found that kindness and respect for human dignity are the most important values, regardless of religion. And another common ground can be found in the stories that Americans of faith want to tell about themselves. So here across the board, we see that many just want to be seen as everybody else, diverse in their beliefs and traditions, but united by common values and life pursuits. For example, we can hear from Bradley, a Muslim, and a slightly liberal independent from California.
I would like all Americans to understand that just because we're Muslim Americans doesn't make us any less American than they are. We like baseball, we like hot dogs, albeit beef hot dogs. We like playing with our children. We like to do all the same things that every other American likes to do. Just we pray 5 times a day. We go to a church on a Friday instead of a Sunday. And we believe that all of us are equally, blessed and going to make it to heaven. Whereas,
and on the right-hand side, we can hear from Brittany, a Latter-day Saint from Utah, saying that I wish people knew we were true Christians. We all make mistakes, but we don't want to be hateful. We really are just trying to love and serve. Lastly, when we move away from misperceptions, it also allows us to more creatively imagine what the role of faith can be in our age of political polarization. We found that there's extensive need for spiritual guidance on navigating polarization across different communities. For example, here we see that around half of Americans who attend services regularly, including the majority across most faith traditions, say they want religious leaders at their places of worship to provide guidance on navigating political division, talking to people whose political views are different, and navigating demographic or cultural changes. And we see that this is a common ground that many across different communities of faith point to. And it really shows that the power of faith in uniting all of us and helping us mitigate the effects of polarization. And you might be thinking, how can we do that? And what are some resources that faith communities can utilize? And with that, I can pass it over to Julia, who will moderate a panel with faith leaders who are doing exactly that and share a little bit about their insights.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Coco, for that kind of high level overview of some of the key findings. And as we'll flag at the end, this is just a small snapshot of all of the insights in our 140 plus page report. So I would encourage you to check out our website and read the report to find additional insights, specifically those maybe relevant to the faith community or tradition you're coming from. At this stage, really excited to spend the last 20 or so minutes facilitating a panel discussion with our friends at One America Movement to help us make sense of what we just heard, and also, to Coco's point, really stretch the imagination around the role that faith leaders and communities can play moving forward by lifting up the voices and experiences of three wonderful faith leaders that we've worked closely with and really admire and respect. So today, really grateful to be joined by Pastor Tom Breeden, Shaykh Ibad Wali, and Rabbi Fred Reeves, all from One America Movement. Pastor Tom is a senior pastoral advisor at One America Movement. Shaykh Ibad is the senior Muslim advisor, and Rabbi Fred is the director of Jewish programs. You are all in for a treat, as Coco and I and others on our team have been very fortunate to work with all three of them over the past couple of years and have just been continually impressed and inspired by just the wisdom, compassion, and intentionality that they bring to their work, helping faith leaders and communities really develop the skills and confidence that is needed to overcome toxic polarization. So with that, maybe we can dig in. I'll ask, yes, the three of you to please come off camera so that we can, great to see you all. And I'm just gonna dive right into the first question, if you don't mind. I think as we've shared in Coco's presentation and some of the framing at the beginning, our research really surfaced these three misperceptions. So first, faith is primarily about politics. Faith is becoming increasingly irrelevant, and faith communities are intolerant. We also talked about some of the consequences of those misperceptions, but would love to hear from you all. How, if at all, have these misperceptions impacted you or your faith community? I don't know if somebody wants to chime in first, otherwise I can popcorn us around. Rabbi Fred, you've given us a smile.
We're also deferential to one another. No, please, no, you please talk. So you're asking about how these misperceptions and how they've affected our faith communities. I will say that hearing the report and seeing the findings that you have about the misperception, I would say, yeah, those misperceptions are not only there in the American population in general, but I have heard these exact misperceptions come from people that I've interacted with in synagogues. I did a presentation the other day at a synagogue in Connecticut, and somebody came up to me afterward and was like, yeah, this is all great, but we really need to be reaching the people who aren't in synagogues. And I'm like, but I'm reaching you and you're in a synagogue right now, man. And so the narrative is really already built in, and these misperceptions we really need to work against, because they are definitely all over the place.
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you,
Ibad,
Rabbi.
how is it showing up for you?
Yeah, thank you, Rabbi Fred, and thank you again for putting this together. Faith has been a very core component of my life, how I operate, how I've, since the age of 11, 12, visible Muslim, going through junior high school, college in New York City, and having to witness 9/11 while in college, doing a paper for my English class. And the perceptions have played a significant role in how I've operated in society. Simple things like, I would rather make a phone call to book a room in a hotel while traveling instead of going there in person. And those things have played out so differently just by people seeing me. Because at the end of the day, the perception is that I'm not engaging with an individual, I'm engaging with their perception of me, and vice versa. Whereas I've had wonderful experiences with teachers and students and friends who we've gotten to know each other personally, and we don't have those perceptions, but rather when we witness them in the media or the social media platforms or in our movies, we question it and we say this is not correct. So it's played a really significant role in my life and shaped me as a human being, as an American, to always kind of feel like I'm on the outside, the periphery of an American identity, looking always in and trying to become a part of it. Whereas that's not the case in my day-to-day interaction with people who know me versus those who don't and only see me through their perception, what's been portrayed by the media.
Thank you.
I think these three myths have had a really profound impact on evangelical meta-perceptions. And for anyone who does not use meta-perceptions in their day-to-day conversations, it's what I think you think about me. So it's me thinking about what you're thinking when you see me. And I encounter so many evangelicals who believe that or think that their neighbors believe all three of these myths. And so it's, you know, their behavior gets shaped in response to that perception. And it can provoke defensiveness, it can provoke avoidance. And both of those things are really corrosive to community, right? Because if you're feeling defensive or avoidant to different people, you're not exactly going to seek relationships with them. And on the other side of it, if you're getting the sense that someone is defensive or avoidant, you're not really going to seek a relationship with them either. And so, yeah, I think these myths have been really corrosive.
Thank you. Just really appreciate you all kind of reflecting on that. And I think are hearing that myths have been corrosive and something we need to kind of push back on and challenge. And we know that kind of public perceptions are shaped by many inputs, but largely by kind of media and political narratives that we're inundated with on a daily basis. And so curious to hear a bit more about what role you think faith leaders and faith communities can play in reshaping these perceptions and helping the general public understand the more kind of nuanced, diverse, complex dimensions of what it means to be a person of faith in America today. I know that's the $1 million question, but you are all working on that. And so curious if you have any thoughts on how to move that forward.
Being here with you, that's one of the answers to this question. And thank you for all the work that you're doing. And I'm so blessed to be part of the One America movement, to be able to identify these misperceptions, meta-perceptions, and then to work on the ground, on the grassroots levels with faith leaders, with their communities to address this toxic polarization. Something just like mass shootings that take place. For those of us that don't know, you can look up the numbers. It's close to 600 to 700 mass shootings that take place in our country, right? And of those mass murders, which are identified as 3 or more people that have been killed through those mass shootings, God bless their families, that number is huge. But when I'm growing up and I'm seeing in the media that any type of mass shooting that's taking place, I'm at the edge of my seat as a Muslim. Why? Because all I'm doing at that moment, and it's really sad, I'm hoping that the perpetrator of that mass shooting was not a Muslim. That's all I'm waiting for the media to tell me. Is it a Muslim or not? And that's interesting to me because, and then again, going back to that perception or confirmation bias that people are going to feed into, is that, oh, mass shootings are done by Muslims. And that was the narrative for quite a long time. But when you look into it, oh, that's just one in the year that one person happened to have a name of a Muslim name or a background, but there are 600 others that are happening in the country and they're not on the TV, or their faith is not being put into trial because of those. So how do we address this? Letting people know this information, talking about these topics where the media or whichever outlets we're getting information from, how information is construed and a narrative is painted, which is not reflective of reality. So again, that's we do workshops, we do engage in universities and places of worship and talk about these challenges and these issues pertaining to meta-perception and perception.
I think that's really important what Ibad is saying, and building on that. We are at the early phase of misinformation and disinformation in our society. With the development of artificial intelligence, we are only at the beginning. And so the question is, how can we as faith traditions go about addressing some of these problems that we have in our society? I think it's investing in truth and making it understood that if you want to know information that is true, here is a place you can go. We won't have all of the information. Nobody has all of the information. But we have this commitment as people of faith to only share information that we know is true. And for faith leaders to give themselves the skills and the know-how to distinguish between true information and information which I'll say is something other than true, and then to share only that which they know to be true. And there's a focus on the truth and why truth is important, I think, in the three faith traditions that you have represented on your panel here. And when we make it so that the faith communities are where truth resides, then people will be able to develop a sense of safety and community even more so around those locations.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. We're in this moment where a lot of people aren't really sure what to believe about who. And so for faith communities to be places of truth, I think is really important. And one of the things that I'm often struck with and surprised by is how foreign evangelical Christianity can actually be to people who are not evangelicals. Like, I swim in it, so I take this for granted. And then I encounter people, I'm like, oh, yeah, what I said didn't make any sense to you. So I don't think we should take for granted that people know what our faith traditions are about. And that means it's even more important for us to maintain the integrity of our traditions. And when we have people in our communities that are misrepresenting who we are and what we believe, we have a role in reining those things in. There's limited control we have about the stories other people tell about us, but I think we have a lot of influence on the stories that our community tells about itself. And so I think for faith leaders to take that really seriously can make a big difference.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate you sharing that. And I think it's like a really beautiful segue to my next question and something our team has been really thinking about. I think the data, particularly some of the last few slides Coco showed, suggest that Americans really are turning to their faith leaders for guidance in navigating political and social divides. I think one of the most rewarding parts of this project for me has been the opportunity to learn more about your three faith traditions and kind of the elements that are shared, as well as the kind of traditions, rituals that are unique to each. And so would just love to hear more about your personal experience doing this work and how you've drawn on the teachings, on the rituals, on the text or the values of your faith to help bridge divides in your community, and just some lessons that have come out of that.
I think you should go first this time, Tom. Because I went first the first time. Ibad went first the second time.
That's only
Okay.
fair.
So we're keeping score now. Okay, that's fair.
Now?
Yeah. Okay, fair. Okay. It's true. We all play board games together, so there's a lot of scorekeeping that goes on. Yeah, I think something that's really important for Christians is humility and how we approach all of these things. At the very center of the Christian story is that we were helpless to save ourselves, and so God had to intervene to save us. And so the very essence of being a Christian is something that you're given because you couldn't get it for yourself. And I think if that humility is at the heart of who we are and what we believe, it ripples into everything else that we do. And so arrogance and Christianity don't go together. Like, if Christianity makes you arrogant, you haven't understood it. And I think in the ways that we relate to one another, in the ways that we face the challenges in our society and all of these things, I think just a really heavy measure of humility goes a really, really long way.
Survival of the fittest isn't something that we got from faith, right? That the weak should be ruled by those who are strong, and the strong should dominate or oppress the weak. That's not something that faith gave us. It's exactly the opposite. And the more I interact with these wonderful gentlemen, and clergymen in this setting and beyond, the more I see the echoing of the same message, which is, selflessness, right? Which is mercy, compassion. For as Muslims, we believe the spiritual heart is a place where God resides, right? It's only befitting for God to reside in that place, and it's made for God's residence. And if a person is not worshiping God, there's only a few things left. One of which is worshiping the self. And when we worship the self, then we only look out for ourselves. We are only interested in what benefits me and what's good for me and not anyone else, not family, not friends, not country, not the world, certainly. But faith grounds us to do what is best for others. Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said, the best amongst you is the one who's most beneficial to society, to the world. The Quran informs us, saying that Prophet Muhammad, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ, that, oh Prophet Muhammad, we have not sent you to this world except as a mercy. That the only reason for the existence of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was to be a mercy to the world. And by extension, all the believers, we are a source of mercy, a source of compassion, a source of giving. So this is how our faith informs us. And it's the lack of faith. And when there's avoidance of faith, that we see the contrary.
One of the things that I have really benefited from personally doing the work with the One America movement is the opportunity to learn from people like Tom and Ibad. Whenever we've got some kind of topic that we're talking about, it is not a challenge for us to find an element from our faith tradition that supports it. If we're talking about, I don't know, being an in-group moderate, that's one of the words that we will bandy about. It's not difficult to find the resources from within Christianity, from within Islam, from within Judaism that supports that. The work that we do at the One America movement is not only faith-based in the sense that you'll be able to lead off a great joke with a pastor and an imam and a rabbi. We're on a conference call, but we actually have this depth of knowledge about these faiths, and we can just see that they apply so immediately and easily to the kinds of problems that we're having in our society. And when those resources are brought to bear against these issues that we're working against and with and around, it's just so clear that although we are different, we are aiming towards bringing peace, mercy, fulfillment to human society. And when we work together, like I said, there are differences, absolutely. I can't just take something from the evangelical part of our organization and deploy it in the Jewish context. However, the basic ideas behind it are very, very much in sync with one another. And that's one of the strengths that I think that comes out of having a faith-based organization, is recognizing the humanity in each person is something which is core and fundamental to all of our traditions.
Thank you. Really, really appreciate all of your reflections on that question, and also giving the audience insight into why Coco and I have loved this project so much. It's just been an opportunity to gather the wisdom of so many faith leaders across the country, which has been really, really humbling. I think in all of your answers, you kind of touched on this a little bit, but are kind of alluding to the importance and the relevance of faith in America today. And so would be curious to kind of unpack that a little bit more. How do you all think about the relevance of faith and faith institutions in American life today, particularly for young people? And thinking back to what Coco shared about Gen Z, kind of what, if any, changes do you think that faith communities should embrace, or kind of adaptations to better engage young people today, and to kind of meet some of the spiritual and moral questions they're considering?
I spent 18 years as a pulpit rabbi, and I can absolutely assure you that the people who are in congregations are very actively trying to think, oh, how can we engage the young people? Why aren't the young people coming now? And I was thinking about this because I have a bit of practical advice that were I in a pulpit, I would never want to take. But when I took it myself, it worked wonderfully. Let people know what you're going to be talking about. If I'm thinking, oh, I got this Friday night. Friday night is when Reform synagogues have their big night in the week. I got this Friday night. I could go to the synagogue. I could go to the movies. I could go see a play. There's a suite of things that I might do. How am I going to decide? Well, I read this review of the movie. I read this review of the restaurant. What am I going to experience if I go to the synagogue? If I tell you that I'm going to be talking about this idea or this concept that you are interested in, and then I'm going to give a Jewish context around whatever the problem is or the issue in our society is, then you are more likely to want to come and hear that than if it's a quote unquote generic Shabbat service. I think I do a great job when I was leading services. So I think, oh, of course, people would want to come anyway. But whenever I let people know in advance, oh, we're going to be talking about this, there was always a real response. And I think helping ourselves out by giving the heads up to whether it's Gen Z or whether it's the boomers, whoever it is, they want to know what it is that they can expect as they come.
Yeah, I'll echo that, because I remember having an experience. I was teaching a Sunday school class, and so, beginning of the class, like I would tell people, these are, the next few weeks are this. And when the week on politics came up, I noticed that all of the high school, I usually taught the adult class, and like high school was down the hall, middle school was down the hall. And I noticed on the week on politics, all the high school students were in the back of the room. When I asked the teacher why, he said, well, first off, I wanted to know what you were going to say. But second, all of the high schoolers were curious. And so I think faith communities are a place, like, ask the big questions, right? People can go find partisanship anywhere. They can go find like a self-help talk all over the internet. But I think that young people actually are asking big questions about life and what it means to be a person and to live in this world and address these challenges. And if we think that our faith actually has something to offer to that, then I think we should swing big and like lead with that. And if people know that that's where we're going to go, then I think that they'll come.
Yeah, absolutely. As human beings, we are social creatures. Why do we spend so much time with these, again, and the listed competing agencies in contrast to the church or the environment of a mosque or a synagogue? We are looking for a place of belonging. We don't, there's a misconception that faith leaders, have all the answers, and we don't. And if we fall into that trap, then we're only exacerbating the problem. So people generally don't come to us for answers. That's the truth. They come to us for understanding. And if we can be an outlet for the young to be non-judgmental and to provide that space. And sometimes it's going beyond the walls of the church or the synagogue or the mosque, and to reach out and to go into those spaces themselves where permissible or where it's convenient to engage in that environment of where their friends are or where everyone else is socially active. And it requires a lot of stamina for a faith leader to take their faith and carry it outside of the walls of the bubble of the church or the synagogue and the mosque, and then to use that and lead by faith in those other environments, and then pass on that message of faith and how to operate with faith in all these other aspects of our life. So yeah, getting out there, providing comfort, understanding without judgment. I think that's what we need to do.
Great, thank you. So I just have one more question before I then pivot us over to the Zoom meeting room so that folks on the call can ask you all as questions as well. But wondering if you could offer maybe one concrete step or piece of advice or just kind of final word of wisdom for faith leaders and congregations that they can take to create a greater sense of belonging or cohesion in their local communities, what might that be? Again, this is $1 million question, but curious what you all have done to date that's worked or what you hope to experiment with in the future.
Earlier, please go ahead.
No, please.
What I was going to say is earlier in my life, I had young children, and I was in the process of moving from Atlanta to Chicago. And I was talking with my wife about how we're actually going to accomplish it. And I presented the idea that if we did a drive from Atlanta to Chicago, yes, with these young children, it would take several days and there would be parts that we would hate, but shared suffering creates familial bonds. And we would, through traveling together, become much closer together. And this is something that I have found to be the case in many instances. If you have this shared project, which is difficult, the people with whom you share that project feel more together as a result of it. So if you're trying to bring your congregation together, you're trying to bring your congregation together with another congregation, find something which is hard to do and do it with that group and in that group. And by so doing, you're going to create the bonds of friendship and unity in a way that you just can't otherwise.
Yeah, I would just say join the One America movement, solve all your problems. Honestly, one of the ways we try to provide support to faith leaders is building trust and keeping up with that relationship. Trust is not something you gain just in the beginning of a relationship. It's something you maintain throughout. And that's one of the teachings of our faith, and it's been echoed and perhaps rekindled in this environment of toxic polarization through One America movement, is that we engage with faith leaders and encourage them to also do the same with their congregation, is to continue to build that trust, as your report showed, that people of faith are people that are trusted, and to continue with that trust, to accept it and believe that people are trusting you and are not questioning you as a clergyman or someone who will guide them spiritually and get them closer to God, to embrace that and move forward with building more trust and relationships with the people around you. And that's one of the wonderful works of One America movement, is to focus on relationships. And sometimes it takes a long time, and we have to be patient. And especially with the youth or with the distractions that they're experiencing, we have to be patient and continue to strive to build on that trust and establish a strong relationship.
One of the things that I've become increasingly convinced of the longer I've worked here is that if you're a religious, like if you're a faith leader on this call, you are leading a group of people that are really, really scared. Like fear is just such a common emotion in this moment, not just because of our politics, though I think that's in the mix, but like my friends and I will joke to each other that we're really tired of living through unprecedented events. Like it'd be great if something was just precedented for a change. And so there's just so much uncertainty. There's so much challenge. Like I think people are living in this state of fear, and scared people don't make good decisions, right? We're not at our best when we're afraid. And so I think recognizing that helps us to have compassion for each other. It helps us to give each other the benefit of the doubt. And I think religious communities are well positioned here. The most common command in the Bible is fear not. Like God knows our weakness. He knows that this is hard and that we're easily frightened. And I think trusting that he's actually got this, like he's good. He's going to take care of us. I think that gives us some boldness to reach out to one another.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both, or thank all three of you so much for just your thoughtful reflections this afternoon and the critical work that you're doing. Again, we'll pivot to the Zoom meeting room so you all can ask questions of them as well. But just to echo what I shared earlier, I feel like I always leave conversations with your team feeling just a renewed sense of hope, which is particularly needed for me in this moment. So just deeply grateful to you all. And I think the reflections that you just shared, in particular, what you just highlighted, Pastor Tom, I think just underscores what we hope the key takeaway from our research is that faith communities can and really should play a more active role in addressing toxic polarization, and that all of the tools needed to do that already exist within each of the faith traditions you represent and others, and in the wealth of knowledge and experience, like organizations such as One America Movement and others in this space. So the resources are at your fingertips. It's just a matter of engaging with them deeply and reaching out to get the support that you need to kind of to move forward in this really hard work, which feels particularly critical and urgent as we think about the upcoming election. But the power of faith communities and healing divides will extend far beyond this November and into the years to come. So appreciate you all being part of the conversation on how we can hone our skills and do that better. So with that, we're gonna kind of close out the presentation portion of this particular conversation. Really appreciate you all joining us this afternoon, and a huge thank you again to the entire One America Movement team, both the folks on the call today, as well as everybody that we've talked to over the course of this research project. As I mentioned, we profiled just a small snapshot of some of the data present in our 140 plus page report. So I would encourage you to visit our website to learn more. There you can also find data specific to the 7 subgroups profiled in the report, including evangelical Christians, mainline Protestants, Catholics, Jews, Muslims, and Latter-day Saints. More in Common is here as a resource for you. So please let us know how we can best support you and the important work you're doing. Always happy to do a private briefing for your team or kind of brainstorm ways that we could collaborate on kind of research or partnership opportunities moving forward. I think I can say the same for One America Movement. Please check out their research and reach out to anyone here on this call to learn more about ways to get involved in the great work that they're doing. And then lastly, just wanted to make a shameless plug that we would just really appreciate your help amplifying the report and insights, whether that's by sharing some of the links to the report or reflections on your personal platforms, whether it be social media or newsletter, or helping connect us to other amplifiers and thought leaders who are thinking and writing about the intersections between faith and politics. So with that, we're going to drop a brief survey in the chat. Would ask you to please just take 2 minutes, helpful for both our team and One America Movement's team to improve future webinars. And then also we'll drop a link to a Zoom meeting room. For those who want to continue the conversation, ask questions, our team and the One America team will stick around for another 15-20 minutes. So for those who are interested, please join us there. Otherwise, appreciate your time and hope you have a wonderful rest of your week.